Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reinvention Conversations. And I have on here with me a sex expert. So this one's going to be fun. Ana Lopez is here with me on Zoom. Ana, would you tell the people who you are and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So, my name is Ana Lopez. I'm the owner of Sex and Spanglish. So I'm a sexologist, sex coach, and smut consultant. So I'm a woman of many hats. So I'm actually earning my doctoral degree in human sexuality studies. So I always say that I like live, breathe, and eat sex. I'm obsessed with sex, but not in the way that people think. Like, yes, I enjoy having it. But what I really mean is like I'm really interested in like how people show up in the bedroom and why they show up that way. Like I want to know all of the like ins and outs and like what make people like tick and not just like in the sexual sense, right? And that kind of leads me into like what I do as a sex coach. So I work with ambitious Latinas to help them enjoy sexy vergüenza. So really like directly that translates to without shame. So it's really about helping them to overcome any barriers that are preventing them from enjoying sex. Usually that looks like shame, guilt, awkwardness, embarrassment, uncomfortability. So whether it's around sex in general or around their bodies or just the topic of sex. So yeah, that's what I do.
Oh, amazing. I mean, and this fits in perfectly with like reinventing because when you were talking about the awkwardness and, not enjoying it, I mean, that's basically how things have been set up for people who identify as women, like
Yeah.
for very many reasons. And um historically they've been like, okay, sex revolutions and things like that, but it
Mhm.
hasn't solved all because you're obviously still solving this problem.
Yeah, it's very ingrained in society. And honestly, from the research that I've done, like we've kind of gone backwards. Um, originally, like pre-colonization, like we weren't this. It wasn't as taboo. It was natural, which it is. And it wasn't as taboo, and now it's kind of like it is, and we're working to really undo all of that.
Yeah, what was it about colonization that changed the freedom that was available around sex?
Yeah, it was the different viewpoints. So based on like, their religious beliefs. So it was very much, puritanical Christian views. And I always tell my clients because a lot of my clients do identify as Christian or like some form of. And I always tell them like your belief in and of itself is not a problem. What happens is that a lot of these beliefs have been imposed upon us and when you've identified your own beliefs, you can't use those to like shame yourself. So, for example, I have a client who believes that like people shouldn't have sex before marriage, which I don't agree, but she gets to believe whatever she wants. And she's like, but I had sex before marriage and using that to kind of like shame herself. I'm like, you can't have both. Like you can believe that you are not supposed to have or that people are not supposed to have sex before marriage and that that's not something that you believe in. That is fine and dandy. Like you get to own that belief. But you cannot use that belief. I refuse to allow you to use that belief to like shame yourself. Because if
Mm.
you also believe like by what she's told me, if she also believes that like this quote unquote sin is allowed to be forgiven, then you gotta use like it's all or nothing. It's not, picking and choosing.
Oh,
And so to answer your question it more directly is I really see it's a lot of just like shaming yourself based on your own beliefs or the beliefs of other people, which I think happens outside of religion as well.
oh yeah, 100%. I was thinking when you were talking about colonization, I was thinking about like my culture, which is Nigerian, specifically Yoruba. So that's the southwestern part of Nigeria. And even as a young child, I there were books and like history books and things that showed women naked from the waist up.
Hmm.
Like that was like a thing. Like I remember, and
Yeah.
I remember even I don't. It's almost like I have this memory, but I'm not sure if it's like like I saw an actual human dressed that way. But it was like very common in our literature for women to not be covered. So I'm guessing in the last century, century and a half, that was a thing because the women's breasts in my culture were not sexualized. They were not.
Hmm.
They were not for sex. They were for feeding babies. So women
Yeah.
walked around. Okay, just have the baby there. pop it in its mouth and keep moving.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then when you change that and then it becomes a sex object, I mean, it changes the entire collective narrative of that people.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. And it changes the way that you interact with your body. So it's like not just about sex, which is what I always tell my clients. Like, yes, it does impact your sex life, but it impacts the way that you interact with your body, which then leads to like these horrible health outcomes because you're not familiar with your body in a way. Like I always tell my clients, like I want them to be as familiar with their bodies as they would be like their infant child. Like, that baby's body back and forth, like inside out, right? Like,
Yeah.
I want you to know your body that well, like not just what it looks like, but its functionality and all of that, so that you can advocate for yourself when you go to the doctor. And a lot of women are not doing that or just don't have the ability to do that because they don't know their body. So it's like they're just having to default to the medical professional, which, yes, medical professionals are professionals of the science, but they're not professionals of your body. You are the
Mhm.
only one that is with your body 24/7. And so it just leads to like a lot of, negative health outcomes that impact everyone.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so reinventing one's sex life. Like how would I know if I needed to like, not that I have to, or that I should
Yeah.
consider, maybe consider, how would I know like what's available? It's almost like so reinvention as a concept is usually when we get to the point where like, oh, this part of my life, I just want to burn it all down and build it back into this
Mhm.
amazing thing. Or like I know I have the capacity for this other thing in this area and I'm ready to do that. Like what makes your client or you consider like, I just want to do something completely new in this area of my life when it comes to sex?
Yeah, I find that the common theme for my clients is that there's like something missing. They're just like, sometimes they can readily identify it of like, I'm not orgasming enough or something like that, right? But then others are just like, it's just like I don't get the sex hype. Like something's not right, but I don't know enough to identify what that is. And so
Mhm.
like help essentially, right? And
Yeah.
so I would say that if there's that sensation of like something's missing, but you can't quite put your finger on it, you're just like, I want to, a lot of times this shows up as I want to try new things, which in and of itself is like not a problem. But a lot of times, like I want anyone listening to this or watching this to really check in with themselves of like, if you're like, oh, I want to try something new, I want to spice it up is like a common phrase. That's not problematic. Like you can do that. But I want you to check in with yourself about why you want to spice it up in the first place. Because typically you're implying with that saying, you're implying that your sex life is currently boring, that you're not satisfied, that there's like something missing, right? So really checking in with why you want to make this change. And again, change isn't bad. Like if you want to add some like whips and chains or whatever, you want to do, that's fine. But really checking in with yourself about why. Um, I was gonna say something else and it completely slipped my mind. Yeah, I would just say like if you're just not generally just like satisfied and that's
Mhm.
it, or even dissatisfied, right?
Yeah.
That's definitely time for a reinvention.
Yeah. And satisfaction is just such a nuanced thing.
Mhm.
Like this is a very individual like conversation.
Yes.
When you said, oh, but if a client says, well, I just don't get the hype, so you might have someone who, because we have all of this media. So we have all the media, we have everything that's coming from the outside, and like you hear someone who's hyping up a particular type of
Yeah.
sex, kind of sex, or sexual experience or heightened experience that they say that they're having. And like you said, that almost implies that, like, oh, well, whatever you're doing isn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can have this sense that, like, well, I thought I was enjoying myself. No,
Yeah.
I'm not. And then you have some other people who are thinking, well, I think this is just how it is. They're not having orgasms or they're not
Yes.
enjoying it. They're like, they were schooled by the magazines that said, okay, just lay there and let your
Mhm.
partner get their sex. And so, how does a person know that, like, how do you know where you're at? How do you even evaluate?
Yeah, totally.
Because
So
we don't
I
have
would
an education. Like, you don't even know what's what if you haven't taken the time to think about it.
Yeah, so I would say if, and I think we've all been guilty of this at some point in time, if you find yourself defaulting to what you're quote unquote supposed to be doing, right? So if you're like looking at media, if you're like looking to your friends and what they're doing, I see this in Facebook groups all the time, right? Like if you are defaulting and wondering what other people are doing to kind of like confirm or deny that you're like doing it right, that is
Mhm.
an indication that you're in need of a reinvention, because really reinventing your sex life in my mind, like it can look a multitude of different ways, but really the process is identifying what sex looks like for you. As you mentioned, sex is like a totally individualistic experience, and it doesn't have to look a specific way. And I think this goes back to like, we're not taught about sex. And so we're like, oh, what is like the way? But there is not like the way to do it. There
Mhm.
are a multitude of ways to have sex and what that looks like. And like, you get to decide what that looks like.
Yeah. I think how that's translating to me is wanting more or wanting different
Mhm.
versus thinking about the right way. So it's almost
Mhm.
like if the thinking is coming from, oh, this isn't right or it shouldn't be this way, let's take a step
Yeah.
back. But if it's like, oh, this is cool, this is what I have, this is where I'm at, that's okay. And it's almost like a both and versus a, oh my God, this is wrong and right. Both and versus wrong, right and wrong.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, and again, like I will say this, the cows come home, like wanting something different, even outside of sex, right? Like wanting something different or wanting something in addition to doesn't necessarily mean that what you're currently doing is wrong or bad or, whatever, or is not enjoyable. Um, and that's why it's really important. Like, I want to really encourage people to check in with yourself about why you want the change, and not from a place of like, well, why the hell do you want this change for? But like, of like, oh, what's behind the desire? Because that is what is going to tell you like what's really going on there. Like again, you can change things every day if you want. Like that is fine. I will support you in doing that. But we really want to get clear on why it is that we're doing it, particularly because this is so ingrained into our society, into societal messaging. Um, it can be like a very sneaky thing. You might just think like, oh, like I just want to do this because it sounds fun. And like you can still do it, but we want to figure out like your brain's intentions. Like, do you secretly think that your sex life sucks and you think that doing this new position or this new toy is going to be enjoyable for you? Because that's actually not the solution then. You could still do it, but it's not solving anything.
Yeah. For a person who finds themselves having that shame or feeling like something's wrong, where would they start? So if they're like, oh my God, I really do feel like something's wrong. I feel like something's wrong with me, something's wrong with the way I've been doing it.
Mhm.
And they want to resolve that first before reinventing, where would they start?
Yeah, totally. I would say getting really clear on what exactly they think is wrong. From my experience, it it's probably not what they think it is. And it's really important to at least give your best guess, because what that is doing is that is building that skill of going inward, of like, what is it that I am missing? Even if I'm like, you come to me, for example, and I'm like, actually, I think like this is what it is. Like, I hear what you're saying, but I really think that this is what it is. Um, it's still really building that skill of introspection. And so getting really clear on what is it that you think you're missing, and not allowing, my brain loves to do this, but not allowing your brain to say, I don't know, right? Of
Mhm.
like, no, really, what is it that you're missing? Like if you had to go to the store and look for it, what would you look for? Even if it sounds really weird and silly, like allow yourself to give yourself that answer, because your brain may come up with something that sounds completely ludicrous that you're like, I would never do that. But if you just block it off, then your brain's like, oh, well, I'm not going to give you any answers then, right? Just really allow your brain to like come up with whatever it comes up with, and give yourself time to like sit with that of like, oh, this is actually what I'm wanting. And like, that's okay. I think a lot of times identifying, particularly of those, for those of us that have been socialized as women, like identifying what it is that we want and saying it out loud, that in and of itself is scary. And then we add in sex and it's like, whoa, like calm down.
Yeah, I love that question. If you could go to the store and pick it up, what would it look like? I mean, that's just like that opens up opens up our imagination because
Mhm.
you have to make it concrete. It's like it's sitting on the shelf. What are the features? What's in there? What
Right.
are the buttons on this thing that you want? I really, really love that question. Um, so when you have a client who's like, all right, I worked on the self-worth shame. I know why I want what I want. This is what I want. Is there
Yeah.
a particular mindset that supports that change, that supports them in actually taking that journey? Because change is like a thing. So there's like the
Yeah.
messy middle, there's all the twists and turns. Is there a particular way of thinking that helps them get to where they want to get to?
Yeah, I think for me, it starts really by redefining what things mean for them. So things such as simple, and this is going to be dependent on like what it is that they want, right? But really in redefining a lot of terms, specifically sexual terms. So foreplay, right? What does that mean? What does sex mean? Because a lot of people, when I say sex, they think penis and vagina, and like,
Mm,
sure, but that's not the only way. And so really defining like what it looks like for you as if you were creating products for a store, right? Like what would the features of this product be? Like, I don't know, what size is it? I don't know, whatever, right? Like really just thinking
ah,
about like all of the features and all of that and redefining it for yourself, even if it's just like some of my clients do share this with their partners so that they can kind of get on the same page in terms of foreplay and whatnot. But even if it's just for yourself, because it really broadens your horizon. So I think it starts by like redefining those terms
mhm,
and then incorporating them into, you know, their regular life. Because a lot of times my clients are a lot more satisfied than they think they are, but they're kind of like overlooking it. It's like the person
mhm,
that's like, I have nothing to wear, but they like someone else goes in their closet and is actually like, oh, this is like, you have this outfit and you have this outfit, and you really just never thought to put those pieces together. And I oftentimes find that a lot of people are actually having like the sex that they want, but it's
mhm.
really like the way that they're thinking about it. Again, they're like, oh, it's not supposed to look this way. I'm not supposed to enjoy missionary, for example. I'm supposed to want this other thing. So it's not as good. And so
Yeah.
then it turns into not as being as good because they're like, oh, well, this is going to be good anyway. And it's just like, let me just lay here till it's over. And it's like, no, actually, you really like
You
missionary,
really
or
like
even
it.
vice versa, right? Like, yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's actually brilliant. Like really sitting with that specificity. Again, like you said, going inwards. It sounds like a lot of this is going inwards. A lot of
Mhm.
this is women and people socialized as women getting in touch with themselves. Almost sounds like that's I hear you keep directing people back to
Yes.
don't look
Yes.
outside, look at yourself. And it actually sounds really useful because even if you were thinking about sex toys or learning a particular, I don't know what you call them, like modality of sex or
Mhm.
like sexual experience, when you have the client go in and define it for themselves, even if they don't know the actual technical term, when they find it's almost like they can when they discover the toy or the position or the thing that meets it for them, they can say for sure that this is for me.
Mhm.
Versus when I'm looking out into the world and now I got to try 1,000 things
Yeah.
and almost exhaust themselves in the search. But the answer is inside. And if you find the answer first, so much easier to find the how.
Right. Exactly. And a lot of times what I'd notice, and I think this has to do with like, well, it has to do with multiple things, but primarily it has to do with capitalism and overconsumption, particularly here in the States. I also think this has a lot to do with how women are socialized, that like we need something, right? So we need a partner, we need the makeup, we need the whatever, right? Like things outside of us. Um,
Mhm.
so then it leads us to like defaulting to other people because we don't know any better, right? Like
Yeah.
what I roll, but and also it has a lot to do with capitalism, right? We're like we're buying things, you know, we just want to like consume versus looking at what we have already. And again,
Yeah.
consumption isn't bad, asking for advice, whatever, isn't bad, But when that's like the primary, that should be like the secondary, tertiary. The
Mhm.
primary should really be looking inside of yourself and looking at what you already have. A lot of my clients, what they want, they try to tell me that they don't know what they want, which is absolutely not true because they are the only ones that can know what they want. But they make it sound like their sex life is horrible when actually there are a lot of moments of pleasure in their sex life already, but they're focusing on like, oh, I need something else versus like, how can I get more of the pleasure that I'm already experiencing and figuring out different ways to get that. So, for example, if someone really, I'm just going to use like a super random example, but like if someone really likes like, um, what is it called? Embracing during sex for whatever reason, right? Figuring out, okay, the only way to get like an embrace isn't like my partner hugging me. Like maybe that means, I don't know, I bring a stuffed animal into the room or like something random, right? Like there are plenty of ways that you can figure out how to get that same sensation.
Mhm.
And that's a lot of the work that I do with my clients is like figuring out multiple ways to get what you want because we tend to be focused on I have to
Mm.
get it in this very specific way. Otherwise, I'm not going to orgasm, is usually what it sounds like. But then that leaves you like, if you don't have that thing, then you don't have an orgasm, and then you don't want to have sex. And it leads to you not wanting to have sex, which creates like other problems, right? But it's really
Yeah.
like, how can you use what you already have and get more of what you already have? And also not depend on your partner because your partner isn't going to be available.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that because it reminds me of just some things that I read recently about how we've been trained in recent times to believe that money, buying something, is the solution to every
Yeah.
single problem. Like literally, like,
Mhm.
okay, so your parenting and your relationship and your health and anything, just name it.
Yeah.
You got to go buy something to solve that problem. Whereas we've been solving these same problems for a million years or however
Right.
long we've been here. And
Right.
we were solving them before and experiencing these things long before the kind of technology we have now, long before money was a
Mhm.
thing,
Yeah.
that we can decide to solve these things in a different way. So same thing, and I think this is so important for like my clients who are, single or who are divorced. When you're in a relationship or you're socialized to believe that your whole life and purpose and everything is in your partner, then that's the solution to everything. For a lot of women, that is the solution, is to be married and to have children. And that is supposed to solve all of these other things. That's supposed to solve your financial problems. That's supposed to solve your relational problems. Similar as a general collective, money is supposed to solve all of our problems. But then if we take a step back and say, hey, wait a second, how could I solve this 10 other ways outside of my partner? How could I solve this problem 10 other ways outside of money? And
Mhm.
I think, like you said, with overconsumption, I even think about parenting because I have, parented children. They're all basically adults now. But it's like, I did see a lot of materialism, a lot of parents leaning into paying for things as a way to raise their children, as a way to develop relationship with their children. So relationship was going shopping, relationship was going out to eat, There wasn't the, hey, let's sit together. And this is one of the things I love being Black is we have the hair. So with our daughters, we got you sit down, you sit in my lap, I help you get your hair done. Like we just still had those little moments where we could create connection and we could create relationship without spending any money.
Mhm. Yeah, because it leads to like it being a crutch. Like again, like consumption is not bad. Like, and I would argue that it's like necessary, and also like that again, that shouldn't be like the primary thing. And I think a lot of us are using it as a crutch. So like a relationship, right? Money, sex, whatever, like really a lot of times I see with people is that they are trying to fix the relationship with sex. So like, you know, I'm
Mm.
almost like ignoring the relationship problems by trying to focus on sex. And it's like, well, you had this problem outside of sex, so it's probably not the sex. Like we could talk about it. And also, if you don't like your partner, then like, is it really necessary to focus on the sex?
Yeah, we might want to add in some more variables here
Yeah.
just to just to have a bigger, more complete picture.
Right.
All right. I have one last question. This has been such a great conversation. I love it. Where do people on this journey find the most resistance, or what's like the biggest challenge? Like, okay, so we've got the thinking, like, okay, I know my why, you know, is there like a practical step that tends to cause them a challenge?
Mm. I would say it's probably just getting started,
Mm.
right? Like a lot of people, and I noticed this in myself as well, not in sex, but in terms of like being like, oh, I'm the answer to my problems. Like that is very empowering and also very daunting at the same time. And so really that for lack of better term, like almost like come to Jesus moment of like, I am responsible for my own pleasure can be very daunting. It's very empowering, but it's also like, ooh, I don't want to like I don't want to be responsible for all of this. And I think that is primarily because a lot of women are very mean to themselves
Mhm.
because of how we're socialized. And so it often turns into blame. And so I think really just that first step of like acknowledging like any pleasure that you've ever experienced, both in the bedroom and out, because pleasure is just an emotion that we feel in anything. Um, it really it comes from you. It was created by you. Your
Mm.
partner just happened to be there. Like people
Mm.
aren't necessarily like quote unquote like good in bed. They might enjoy things doing things that you happen to like, but the pleasure is really created by you. And when you can really like embody that and own that, um, that is where change takes place. But that's like the sticky point. So a lot of people don't get past that because they're like, I don't want to take ownership of that.
Mhm. Does is that how that's is my guess is that's not the way they say it. They don't usually say it like, "I don't want to take ownership," even though that's what they're saying.
Yeah, totally. I would say, how would they say it?
In my not culture, but in the way I was conditioned, more conservative, patriarchal
Mhm.
society and religion, the way it was sort of messaged to girls was like your sexuality was this gift, like you gave it
Mm,
to your
mhm.
partner. And therefore, I mean, it's almost like by extension, he was responsible for it.
Yeah, there's
Almost
a
like a dowry, like if you were a woman, back in the day and you had a dowry or you had an
mhm.
inheritance, you handed it over to your husband. In fact, you didn't hand it over. Your father handed it over to your husband
Yeah.
to manage, and he became responsible for all of the outcomes. And I think that's the way I would say I heard it.
Mhm.
And so I'm trying to think of the way it would have come up for me. Almost like it's his fault, I think would be maybe a phrase that I,
Yeah, it's very much a blame thing of
yeah.
like it's his fault or like he's trying. Sometimes it's not even like as negative, right? It's like he's trying and he's so good and it's just so then it turns into you blaming yourself because he's like
Mhm.
so the sweetest person on earth. But it's really just about blame in general, right? So either blaming of your partner or blaming of yourself.
Yeah.
Um, and that really results from like not recognizing like where the pleasure actually comes from. I think it's kind of it's thought of to be something that just kind of happens like it's a surprise and it's like no, we can actually plan for these things.
Yes. Yes. This is so good. Oh my gosh, Anna, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been
Yeah.
so enlightening. I'm sure everyone listening, once this gets out, is going to be like, oh my, because I had light bulbs going off just in many different areas as well. So I think that's going to be happening for people who want to reinvent their own sex lives as well, which I don't know. I think that's the thing we should all be doing like constantly.
Right.
We don't have too much time. I mean, life is short. Let's go.
Yes.
So, all right. Thank you so much. All right. For everyone listening, the links to connect with me or connect with Anna will be right above the video, whether you're seeing this on LinkedIn or Facebook. And we hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Feel free to leave a comment or a question. We will get a ping and we will reach back out. All right. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.